This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Camp of the Dog by Algernon Blackwood. Read by Charles Blakemore. The Camp of the Dog, Part 5. Everything changed from the moment John Silence set foot on that island. It was like the effect produced by calling in some big doctor, some great arbiter of life and death, for consultation. The sense of gravity increased 100-fold. Even inanimate objects took upon themselves a subtle alteration. For the setting of the adventure, this deserted bit of sea with its hundreds of uninhabited islands, somehow turned somber. An element that was mysterious and, in a sense, disheartening, crept unbidden into the severity of gray rock and dark pine forest, and took the sparkle from the sunshine and the sea. I, at least, was keenly aware of the change, for my whole being shifted as it were a degree higher, becoming keyed up and alert. Figures from the background of the stage moved forward a little into the light, nearer to the inevitable action. In a word, this man's arrival intensified the whole affair. And looking back down the years to the time when all this happened, it is clear to me that he had a pretty sharp idea of the meaning of it from the very beginning. How much he knew beforehand by his strange divining powers, it is impossible to say. But from the moment he came upon the scene and caught within himself the note of what was going on amongst us, he undoubtedly held the true solution of the puzzle, and had no need to ask questions. And this certitude it was that set him in such an atmosphere of power, and made us all look to him instinctively. For he took no tentative steps, made no false moves, and while the rest of us floundered, he moved straight to the climax. He was indeed a true diviner of souls. I can now read into his behavior a good deal that puzzled me at the time, for though I had dimly guessed the solution, I had no idea how he would deal with it. And the conversations I can reproduce almost verbatim, for according to my invariable habit, I took full notes of all he said. To Mrs. Maloney, foolish and dazed, to Joan, alarmed yet plucky, and to the clergyman, moved by his daughter's distress below his usual shallow emotions, he gave the best possible treatment in the best possible way, yet all so easily and simply as to make it appear naturally spontaneous. For he dominated the boatswain's mate, taking the measure of her ignorance with infinite patience. He keyed up Joan, stirring her courage and interest to the highest point for her own safety. And the Reverend Timothy he soothed and comforted, while obtaining his implicit obedience by taking him into his confidence and leading him gradually to a comprehension of the issue that was bound to follow. And Saint-Gris, here his wisdom was most wisely calculated. He neglected outwardly, because inwardly he was the object of his unceasing and most concentrated attention. Under the guise of apparent indifference, his mind kept the Canadian under constant observation. There was a restless feeling in the camp that evening, and none of us lingered round the fire after supper as usual. Saint-Gris and I busied ourselves with patching up the torn tent for our guest, and with finding heavy stones to hold the ropes, for Dr. Silence insisted on having it pitched on the highest point of the island ridge, just where it was most rocky, and there was no earth for pegs. The place, moreover, was midway between the men's and women's tents, and, of course, commanded the most comprehensive view of the camp. So that if your dog comes, he said simply, I may be able to catch him as he passes across. The wind had gone down with the sun, and an unusual warmth lay over the island that made sleep heavy. And in the morning we assembled at a late breakfast, rubbing our eyes and yawning. The cool north wind had given way to the warm southern air that sometimes came up with haze and moisture across the Baltic, bringing with it the relaxing sensations that produced enervation and listlessness. And this may have been the reason why at first I failed to notice that anything unusual was about, and why I was less alert than normally. For it was not till after breakfast that the silence of our little party struck me, and I discovered that Joan had not yet put in an appearance. And then in a flash The last heaviness of sleep vanished, and I saw that Maloney was white and troubled, and his wife could not hold a plate without trembling. A desire to ask questions was stopped in me by a swift glance from Dr. Silence, and I suddenly understood in some vague way that they were waiting till Sangree should have gone. How this idea came to me I cannot determine, but the soundness of the intuition was soon proved, for the moment he moved off to his tent, Maloney looked up at me and began to speak in a low voice. "You slept through it all," he half whispered. "Through what?" I asked, suddenly thrilled with the knowledge that something dreadful had happened. "We didn't wake you for fear of getting the whole camp up," he went on, meaning by the camp, I supposed, Sangree. "It was just before dawn when the screams woke me." "The dog again?" I asked, with a curious sinking of the heart. "Got right into the tent," he went on, speaking passionately but very low, "and woke my wife by scrambling all over her. Then she realized that Joan was struggling beside her, and by God the beast had torn her arm. Scratched all down the arm she was, and bleeding." "Joan injured?" I gasped. "Merely scratched. This time," put in John Silence, speaking for the first time, "suffering more from shock and fright than actual wounds." "Isn't it a mercy the doctor was here?" said Mrs. Maloney, looking as if she would never know calmness again. "I think we should have both been killed." "It has been a most merciful escape," Maloney said, his pulpit voice struggling with his emotion. "But of course we cannot risk another. We must strike camp and get away at once." "Only poor Mr. Sangree must not know what has happened. He is so attached to Joan, and would be so terribly upset," added the boatswain's mate distractedly, looking all about in her terror. "It is perhaps advisable that Mr. Sangree should not know what has occurred," Dr. Silence said with quiet authority, "but I think for the safety of all concerned it would be better not to leave the island just now." He spoke with great decision, and Maloney looked up and followed his words closely. "If you will agree to stay here a few days longer, I have no doubt we can put an end to the attentions of your strange visitor, and incidentally have the opportunity of observing a most singular and interesting phenomenon." "What?" gasped Mrs. Maloney. "A phenomenon? You mean that you know what it is?" "I am quite certain I know what it is," he replied very low, for we had heard the footsteps of Sangree approaching, "though I am not so certain yet as to the best means of dealing with it. But in any case it is not wise to leave precipitately." "Oh, Timothy! Does he think it's a devil?" cried the boatswain's mate in a voice that even the Canadian must have heard. "In my opinion," continued John Silence, looking across at me and the clergyman, "it is a case of modern lycanthropy, with other complications that may—" He left the sentence unfinished, for Mrs. Maloney got up with a jump and fled to her tent, fearful she might hear a worse thing, and at that moment Sangree turned the corner of the stockade and came into view. "There are footmarks all round the mouth of my tent," he said with excitement. "The animal has been here again in the night. Dr. Silence, you really must come and see them for yourself. They're as plain on the moss as tracks in snow." But later in the day, while Sangree went off in the canoe to fish the pools near the larger islands, and Joan lay still, bandaged and resting, in her tent, Dr. Silence called me and the tutor, and proposed a walk to the granite slabs of the far end. Mrs. Maloney sat on a stump near her daughter, and busied herself energetically with alternate nursing and painting. "We'll leave you in charge," the doctor said with a smile that was meant to be encouraging, "and when you want us for lunch or anything, the megaphone will always bring us back in time." For though the very air was charged with strange emotions, everyone talked quietly and naturally, as with a definite desire to counteract unnecessary excitement. "I'll keep watch," said the plucky boatswain's mate, "and meanwhile I find comfort in my work." She was busy with the sketch she had begun on the day after our arrival. "For even a tree," she added proudly, pointing to her little easel, "is a symbol of the divine, and the thought makes me feel safer." We glanced for a moment at a daub which was more like the symptom of a disease than a symbol of the divine, and then took the path round the lagoon.